You think you know the Netherlands? Just tulips, windmills, and bikes, right? Wrong. What if I told you this tiny country once controlled half the world's trade, survived deadly floods by literally reshaping the land, and built cities that float on water? The Netherlands looks small on a map, but its story is massive. Canals that cut through medieval towns, tulip fields that stretch like endless carpets of color, and cities where old churches stand right next to futuristic glass towers. It's a place where history and travel aren't separate. They're the same thing. And if you only see the postcards, you'll miss the real magic. Here's the problem. When people think of the Netherlands, they think cliches. Amsterdam's red light district. A picture of tulips. Maybe a windmill or two. But that's like looking at a painting through a keyhole. You miss the whole picture. The challenge is to see the Netherlands as it really is. A country that's been fighting against the sea for centuries, building empires through trade, and creating cities that became centers of art, power, and innovation. Think about it. This is a land where people built dikes and drained swamps just to survive. Where an obsession with tulips turned into the first ever economic bubble. Where canals aren't just pretty tourist spots but lifelines that kept towns alive. And where every street corner tells you a story if you're willing to listen. So in this journey, we're not just sightseeing. We're digging into the hidden layers. How did the canals of Amsterdam become the veins of a global empire? Why did tulips cause financial chaos that feels oddly familiar today? And how do timeless Dutch cities balance history with modern life in ways no other country can? We're about to explore canals, tulips, and cities, but through their secrets, their struggles, and their role in shaping not just Dutch history, but world history. When you first step into Amsterdam, it feels like a dream. The air is damp, the houses lean just slightly, and the canals shimmer with reflections of old gabled buildings. Tourists call it the Venice of the North, but that comparison actually misses the point. Amsterdam's canals weren't built for romance. They were built for survival, power, and money. Back in the 17th century, the Dutch Golden Age, Amsterdam exploded as one of the world's busiest ports. But the city wasn't naturally suited for that. The land was swampy, unstable, and constantly at war with the sea. To fix that, the Dutch built canals in a system that was both defense and design. The famous canal ring wasn't just pretty architecture, it was an engineering solution to keep water out, goods flowing, and ships loaded. Imagine a city laid out not for cars, but for trade routes on water. That's exactly what Amsterdam became. And here's the twist. Those canals made Amsterdam rich. They weren't tourist backdrops like they are today. They were highways for spices from Indonesia, silver from the Americas, furs from Russia, and porcelain from China. Every crate, every barrel, every shipment of goods could be moved right into the heart of the city by water. The canals didn't just protect the people, they turned Amsterdam into the financial capital of the world. But canals weren't only in Amsterdam. Cities like Utrecht, Haarlem, Leiden, and Delft also built their own systems. Delft's canals are smaller, quieter, lined with old brick houses and willow trees. They look peaceful, but these waterways were once lifelines. If a city didn't control its water, it didn't survive. Floods could wipe out entire towns. Dikes had to be built. Water boards, local councils that managed the dikes and canals, were some of the earliest forms of democracy in Europe. Imagine that. Dutch politics was literally born out of the fight against water. And the floods never stopped coming. One of the deadliest, the St. Elizabeth's flood in 1421, killed tens of thousands and reshaped the landscape forever. Whole villages vanished underwater. To this day, you can find lakes and wetlands in the Netherlands that exist only because of those floods centuries ago. The Dutch response wasn't to run from the sea, but to fight it. To claim land back, they drained swamps and built polders, fields surrounded by dikes where people could farm. If you've ever seen those endless green fields with windmills standing tall, that's not just scenery, it's survival. Windmills weren't built just for charm. They pumped water out of the polders. Without them, the land would sink back into swamp. Each turn of the blades meant dry ground for farming, food for families, and safety from the sea. And this battle against water isn't just history. Even today, with rising sea levels, the Netherlands is one of the most vulnerable countries on Earth. 2/3 of the country is at risk of flooding. Amsterdam's canals are a reminder of past victories, but also warnings of future threats. The Dutch have built storm surge barriers, high-tech dikes, and even floating neighborhoods. They're proving once again that survival depends on mastering water. Here's what's amazing. While most countries fear the sea, the Dutch turned it into an ally. Canals became streets. Dikes became fortresses. Water wasn't the enemy, it was the foundation of power. That's why when you walk through Amsterdam, Delft, or Utrecht today, you're not just looking at pretty reflections. You're standing in a city built by necessity, engineered to survive and designed to thrive. And this brings us to something you might not expect, the next chapter in the Dutch story. Because after mastering water, the Dutch set their sights on something even stranger. Flowers. Not just any flowers, tulips. Picture a field stretching out like a rainbow carpet, rows of red, yellow, purple, and white tulips glowing under the spring sun. Today, that's the image everyone has of the Netherlands. But here's the kicker. Tulips didn't even come from here. They were imports. Foreigners. Strangers to Dutch soil. And yet, in the 1600s, they became so powerful they turned into money itself. The story begins in the Ottoman Empire. Tulips were exotic flowers, grown in Istanbul's royal gardens, admired by sultans. Dutch traders saw them, brought them home, and something strange happened. In the Netherlands, this land that already thrived on trade and obsession with beauty, tulips caught fire. Their colors were rare, their shapes unique, and suddenly they weren't just flowers. They were status symbols. If you had tulips in your garden, you weren't just wealthy. You were untouchable. But the obsession didn't stop at admiration. It turned into frenzy. By the 1630s, tulip bulbs were being bought and sold for insane amounts of money. A single bulb could cost as much as a house in Amsterdam. That's right. People traded homes, land, and fortunes for a flower that might not even bloom. This wasn't just gardening. It was speculation. People bet their futures on the idea that tulips would keep climbing in value. The rarest varieties, like the Semper Augustus, were worth thousands of guilders. Contracts were signed. Markets opened. And suddenly the world's first economic bubble was born, tulip mania. Then, just like every bubble in history, it burst. One day in February 1637, buyers simply stopped showing up at auctions. Panic spread. Prices collapsed. Fortunes vanished overnight. People who thought they were rich were left with worthless bulbs and ruined lives. Sound familiar? That's because tulip mania was basically a 17th century version of the stock market crash, or the housing bubble, or even the crypto crashes of today. Different product, same human greed. But here's the twist. While tulip mania left individuals bankrupt, the Dutch Republic didn't collapse. In fact, it barely flinched. Why? Because tulips were just one part of a much bigger machine. The Netherlands, at the height of its golden age, was already dominating world trade. Tulips were a symbol of wealth, but ships were the real source of it. Let's talk about those ships. The Dutch didn't just trade, they built an empire from the sea. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, was founded in 1602. It wasn't just a company. It was basically a nation with its own army, navy, and currency. It controlled trade routes across Asia, bringing back spices like nutmeg, pepper, and cloves, commodities so valuable that wars were fought over them. Amsterdam became the center of it all. Its canals weren't just local lifelines anymore, they were international highways. Goods flowed in, money piled up, and soon Amsterdam was home to the world's first stock exchange. That's right, the modern idea of stocks, bonds, and trading all trace back to the Netherlands. If Wall Street has a grandfather, it's Amsterdam's Damrak. And while trade brought in money, art turned it into culture. This was the age of Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Frans Hals. Painters captured Dutch life in intimate detail, merchants counting coins, housewives pouring milk, ships at harbor, tulips glowing in vases. These paintings weren't just decoration. They were reflections of a society obsessed with wealth, order, and beauty. But this golden age had a dark side too. The Dutch wealth was built not only on trade and tulips, but on colonization and exploitation. The VOC's power in Asia was brutal. Fortunes were made off the backs of enslaved people, forced labor, and violent control. The canals of Amsterdam, as beautiful as they are, were lined with the profits of empire, an empire that often left scars far beyond Europe. So tulips tell two stories. On one side, beauty, obsession, and the birth of financial markets. On the other, greed, risk, and collapse. Together, they explain why the Netherlands isn't just about flowers. It's about the human hunger for more wealth, more status, more beauty, more control. And that hunger shaped not just the Golden Age, but the cities we still see today. Because while tulips faded back into gardens, the Dutch cities kept growing, changing, and holding on to their timeless identity. When people picture the Netherlands, Amsterdam usually takes the spotlight. But to stop there would be like reading only the first chapter of a book. The real Dutch story is scattered across its other cities, each one a piece of the puzzle that makes this country what it is. Take Utrecht. It's one of the oldest cities in the Netherlands, with roots going all the way back to the Romans. Walk its streets and you'll notice something different. Canals here aren't like Amsterdam's. In Utrecht, many of them sit lower with wharves at water level. Cafes and cellars line the canal edges, creating a unique double-street system. This design isn't just quirky, it's practical. For centuries, goods could be unloaded directly into storage vaults at water level, then carried up to the streets above. And towering above it all is the Dom Tower, the tallest church tower in the Netherlands. Built in the 14th century, it still dominates the skyline. For the people of Utrecht, it's more than architecture. It's a reminder of resilience, of a city that's been a religious, political, and cultural center for centuries. If Amsterdam was the brain of Dutch trade, Utrecht was its heart. Now head west to The Hague. Unlike Amsterdam or Utrecht, The Hague wasn't built to be a trading hub. Instead, it became the seat of power. Here you find the Binnenhof, the political center where the Dutch government still meets. This is also the home of the International Court of Justice, where global disputes are settled. But The Hague isn't just about politics. It's also about art. The Mauritshuis Museum holds masterpieces like Vermeer's Girl with a pearl earring, a painting that feels almost like the soul of the Netherlands captured on canvas. The Hague shows a different side of Dutch identity: diplomacy, justice, and quiet sophistication. It doesn't shout like Amsterdam's canals. It whispers in marble halls and courtrooms. And then there's Rotterdam, the rebel. The city was almost completely destroyed during World War II by German bombers. Instead of rebuilding the old, Rotterdam chose something bold: modern architecture. Today it's a city of glass towers, futuristic bridges, and experimental design. The Erasmus Bridge, nicknamed the Swan, cuts across the Maas River like a sleek blade. The cube houses tilt at impossible angles. Rotterdam looks forward, not backward. But don't mistake modernity for coldness. Rotterdam is still a port city at its core, one of the busiest in the world. Ships carrying goods from every continent pass through here, making Rotterdam a beating artery of global trade. If Amsterdam was the Golden Age center, Rotterdam is the 21st century powerhouse. So what do these cities, Utrecht, The Hague, Rotterdam, teach us about Dutch identity? That it's layered. It's not just tulips or canals. It's old churches and futuristic towers, political chambers and busy harbors. It's a balance between memory and innovation, tradition and reinvention. And at the center of all this is the Dutch people themselves. Direct, practical, sometimes blunt, but always adaptive. They live in a country where survival has always depended on cooperation, whether that meant building dikes, running waterboards, or navigating trade routes across the globe. Dutch identity is tied to resilience. To looking at a swamp and saying, "We'll make land." To looking at a flood and saying, "We'll build higher." To looking at war ruins and saying, "We'll build differently." Every Dutch city tells this same story in its own way. Utrecht whispers it through medieval towers. The Hague speaks it through courtrooms. Rotterdam shouts it through steel and glass. And together, they remind us that history isn't frozen, it's alive, adapting with every generation. Which brings us to the final chapter of our journey. Because if the canals, tulips, and cities explain the past, the real question is this: what does the Netherlands mean for the future? Here's the truth: the Netherlands shouldn't exist. Look at the map. 2/3 of this country is below sea level. By nature, it should have been swallowed by the North Sea long ago. And yet it's still here. Not just surviving, but thriving. That's the climax of the Dutch story. This land is a living symbol of human resilience. Think about it. Canals carved into swamps became the lifelines of cities. Tulips turned from foreign flowers into the center of a global mania, teaching the world lessons about greed and beauty. Trade transformed a small republic into one of the most powerful nations on earth. And cities, scarred by time and war, rebuilt themselves into timeless reminders that history never dies. It adapts. The Netherlands is proof that human determination can bend nature, bend markets, even bend time. That's why standing on an Amsterdam canal bridge or staring out over a tulip field feels different. You're not just looking at scenery. You're looking at centuries of people saying, "We will not give up." So when we talk about the magic of the Netherlands, it's not just canals, tulips, or cities. It's the story beneath them. The canals are about survival and trade. The tulips are about obsession and ambition. The cities are about identity and reinvention. Put them together and you get a country that's always been small in size but massive in influence. This is why the Netherlands matters. Not just as a travel destination, but as a reminder of what humans are capable of when they refuse to sink. The magic isn't in the postcards. It's in the people, the history, and the way every brick, every bridge, every flower tells you the same thing. This land should not exist, but it does. Stick around and watch the next video, because the world's hidden stories are just getting started.